So
that's right.
All the better.
It looks like we have several people in student development theory classes, which is actually something I was planning to ask in the middle of our presentation. So for those of you all that are currently absorbing all of that content knowledge, y'all feel free to share as we go through the presentation today. If you have feedback, this is certainly a mutual learning experience.
All right, you all. Well, we've been given permission to start a little early, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. This presentation is being conducted as a part of the NASPA-AL New Professionals Institute, as I'm sure many of you already know. But I'd like to thank each of you for joining us today. My name's Jennifer Griffin, and I'll serve as one of the facilitators for our student development theory session today. And so I wanted to start off just by sharing a little bit about myself and my career in student affairs. I started in student affairs at Eastern Kentucky University, where I received my master's degree in higher education administration and served as a graduate assistant for both university housing and Greek life. It was a dual assistantship. And so I took my university housing experience to the University of Alabama at Birmingham's Office of Student Housing and Residence Life, where I served initially as a residence life coordinator for one of our upperclassmen buildings here at UAB, and then as the assistant director for housing. In March of 2016, I think I made the transition to the Office of Student Involvement and Leadership at UAB, where I currently am serving as the director. And so every aspect of my professional experience has included advising and supporting students through the application of student development theory. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that experience with everyone today. But I'm going to turn it over to my co-facilitator now so that she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm co-tent, formerly Lauren Hobbs co-tent. The majority of my professional career, I was recognized as Lauren Hobbs. I still feel like I got to throw that in there. I am in my 10th year working in student affairs, and I began my career really immediately after my undergraduate experience. I was trying to find job placement, just like most of our students are. I have a communications degree from the University of Alabama, and someone at Alabama said, "Hey, Lauren, have you thought about getting into higher ed?" And so that was really my first time I had considered this as a career field. I found someone who was crazy enough to hire a brand new college graduate. And in 2011, I started working at Huntingdon College in Montgomery, where I served for 4 years. And so I served there starting out in residence life. So for all of you that are in residence life, I know the grind associated to that. Also worked with fraternity and sorority programs as well as leadership development there. Following that time, and actually I should mention while I was there, I pursued my master's degree, and I received that from Troy University in adult education. And my master's degree really sparked an interest in me to pursue a PhD. So while I was at Montgomery at Huntingdon College, I decided to transition to Auburn and to Auburn's PhD program in adult education. And with that, looking for that tuition benefit. So I was fortunate enough to also receive a new career opportunity at Auburn by working in the university's career center. So career services is another part of my professional background. I was at Auburn a couple of years before an opportunity presented itself to get back into what really I consider my true love, which is student leadership. And I've been at UAB now for 4 years. I serve as the assistant director of leadership and service at UAB, and I work predominantly with our student organizations and volunteerism and community engagement initiatives. And so anything Jennifer can find to assign me to, she's pretty good at. But I enjoy the variety of exposure I get to different students and opportunities to develop as a professional, both here and through my membership in NASPA Alabama. And so we're super excited you all are here, and hope we'll be able to share something with you today that we've learned through our experience and through our academic careers as we discuss student development theory.
And so we want to start off by really talking a little bit about what our current kind of frame of reference is. And so we thought we'd tell you a little bit about our current department and our area of current oversight, in addition to what you've heard about our specific experience. And so the Office of Student Involvement and Leadership at UAB as you can see by our mission, really exists to create experiences that prepare our students to serve, inspire, and lead. And we do this through the functional areas of leadership and service, which includes our student organization community, student volunteerism, student leadership development, and student government, like Lauren just shared. We also oversee the area of fraternity and sorority life, which includes 4 governing councils consisting of 28 chapters and a Greek Honor Society. And then we also oversee the area of student activities, which encompasses our Miss UAB program, as well as programming boards focused on gaming, spirit and traditions, and various forms of live entertainment. And so it's through these areas that we have the opportunity to demonstrate our core values of connection, discovery, and responsibility. And so I hope that provides you all with a little bit of context as to what Lauren and I's frame of reference is within our current experience here at UAB.
And so the intended learning outcomes today, what we want you to take out of this is really 3 different things. We first hope that you'll be able to post-presentation define some critical terms as they relate to student development theory. We're going to review both the assumptions and concepts that are associated to student development. And we hope you'll be able to retain those and be able to apply them directly to your experience as a new student affairs professional. And so that is our hope. And we're going to kind of jump into the content now to help you start to begin learning these 3 areas. Before we do that, I got a little ahead of myself and said I was going to jump into the content. I do want to mention that I'm toggling back and forth between my presenter view and my screen share, so y'all bear with me if there's a moment between slides here. I would love to get a better idea. Some of you have already started with who's in the room. And so the reason that this is important is that we're all really learning together. As I shared earlier, we really believe in a mutual learning experience. And we also want to understand a little bit of your background as it relates to your knowledge of student development. And so in the chat, if you could drop in the functional area in which you work. So for example, for me and Jennifer, that's student involvement and leadership, as well as your institution. And then if you are currently enrolled in a master's program, maybe you've concluded your master's program, or really any exposure you've had to student development. And so as Charles has already shared, he's currently in a student development class. We would love to know that so we can really call on some of y'all's expertise as well as scholars on this area. Give everybody a second to type that in. Great. Looks like we have someone from Auburn. Several from Auburn. Awesome. UA, Roll Tide, my alma mater. Great. And so it looks like already that we have a range of individuals, which makes this fun, right? We can learn from each other when we bring our rich history of experiences to the table. And so as I said earlier, I want to really re-emphasize, feel free to use the chat as we go through today's presentation to really share your thoughts on the premise of student development, or maybe things that you've taken away from your master's program, courses you've had, or from direct experience advising and supporting students through your direct role on your institutional campus.
So before we can talk about student development theory, it's important to have a shared understanding of a few key terms. And so the first term we're going to discuss today is change. And change refers to any condition that is altered from a previous condition. For the purpose of student development theory, it's helpful to understand that change happens both internally within our students as well as externally in their environment. Some of this is within the student's control and some of it is out of their control. And this change can be positive or negative, as well as healthy or unhealthy. The next term is growth, and Webster's dictionary defines to grow as to come into being or be produced naturally, to thrive as a living thing. And growth, as it relates to student development theory, focuses on the expansion of personality traits as well as the maturation of our students. But I like to use the term, or like to think of it as our students thriving, and think of them as thriving when they're growing. I do think it's important to note that our students won't always feel like they're thriving when they go through moments of growth, and their perception is important for our next term. And so the most important thing to remember with the term development is that it is a process. It's oftentimes fluid and ever evolving. And development refers to the increasing complexity of an organism to make it fuller, bigger, and better. This definition perfectly aligns with the theories we'll discuss today because in student development theory, development is always positive and always healthy. Lauren, would you go to the next slide for me? I also think in order to understand student development theory, it's important to understand how we've defined these three terms, but I also want you to consider the following questions as we go through our presentation today. So the first question is, what interpersonal or intrapersonal changes occur while our students are in college? Number two is, what factors lead to this development if you're reflecting on your students' previous experiences? Number three is, what aspects of the college environment encourage or discourage growth? And number four, what developmental outcomes should we strive to achieve should our students strive to achieve? Should we strive to present opportunities for while they are in college? And so consider how change, growth, and development are similar as well as how they differ. And then how might they be intertwined throughout our students' experience? As you all reflect on that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren to introduce some of the major schools of theory.
Thanks, Jennifer. And so as we start this discussion, it's important for us to be able to define or at least summarize student development so you understand what we're talking about as we keep reusing this term. And so there is not one concise definition that's adopted by every student affairs practitioner that defines student development. Student development is really a school of theories. It is based on the premise that humans develop over a continuum and that by exposure to the environment that can contribute to that development, and ultimately it connects curricular and co-curricular experiences on a college campus. And so when you think about student development, I want you to think of it as a verb. And so student affairs is who we are. We're a noun. Student development is what we do. We're developing our students. This is so important because as a student affairs professional, I consider myself an educator. But when I go to have a conversation with maybe it's a faculty member on our campus, or maybe it's someone who doesn't work in higher education, or maybe it's my student to try to explain my role in serving their education, I can use student development theory to really guide that conversation. It justifies my work and legitimizes what we're doing in our practice. Because again, it's combining that curricular component, which we know is a critical component of higher education, with the co-curricular and creating a whole student experience to holistically develop our students and help them navigate on that human development spectrum. Again, I'm toggling back and forth, so y'all bear with me here. All right, so as I mentioned, student development is really founded upon a school of theories. And there's 4 schools of theory that I really think are important to note. And now as I say this, I probably think that y'all are going to be thinking you need to leave the room right now because you didn't sign up for a theory class where you're going to have to really deep dive. And so I'm going to hit the highlights. As you all know, because some of you are enrolled in courses related to student development, we could spend an entire semester talking about student development theory. So we're going to hit on the top 4 areas of student development theory, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I do want to encourage you as new professionals, or I know we have some mid-level professionals in the room as well, that as I share these theories with you, jot down some of them and take time, make it a part of your practice to research these theories and implement it into the work you do. I will say that a lot of the work we do naturally align with some of these theories, but to be able to articulate that connection is going to set you apart from your peers, maybe when you go to apply for the next professional role. So just another good reason to pay attention here as we talk about these 4 schools of theory. The first is psychosocial and identity development. And so this is really focused on a sequential type of development. And so it's where biology and psychology converge. And so some really common examples of this school of theory is Erickson's lifespan model, but also Chickering's model, his 7 vectors. And this is one that's really a lot of times focused on in those student development classes you might be taking. So Chickering's vectors really concern itself with a fluid motion of development. And so the stages of development, according to Chickering, aren't hierarchical. I cannot say that to save my life. Okay, and so again, this is a great one for you to look up and to consider as you're working with your students. The second school of thought is cognitive and moral theories. And so this is really focused not on what we're thinking, but the way we're thinking. So how students are thinking, how they're processing information. Kohlberg has a great theory that's associated to this, his theory of moral development, but also Perry's theory. And that's the theory that I really like as I think about cognitive and moral theories here. And so Perry's theory has kind of three components. There's this concept of dualism, and a student with a dualistic tendency tends to think in only of terms of what is right. So right, wrong, that's their view on how they think about things, how they process. They can progress then to relativism, which they start to incorporate multiple perspectives. So as I'm saying this, you can probably think of a first-year student coming into the university experience, right or wrong. They're exposed to the environment, which helps them start to take in some of these multiple perspectives. And then that grows into relativism developed. And that's where they not only take in those multiple perspectives, but they can think big picture and alter their own mindset. And so that's just one example, again, of cognitive and moral. Then you have your typologies. These are pretty common, and I would go out on a limb here and say most everyone has probably heard of the Myers-Briggs typology, the MBTI, and you probably know what your Myers-Briggs little letters are and could have a full conversation with it. And I would say even a lot of our students are aware of this. So this is another type of student development theory, and the typologies really focus on how students relate to the world. And then lastly, you have person and environment. My personal favorite theory that's associated to person environment is Aston's student involvement theory, that really says that the more involved you are and more involved a student is on our campus, the more likely they are to persist. And so as I'm having conversations with our counterparts, you know, in the academic side of the house, this theory and my work in student involvement and leadership really lends to conversations on why we have to work together and collaborate to contribute to our students' development. Because if we get them involved, they're going to be engaged in the classroom. They're going to persist to graduation. And so again, these are the four major school of thoughts. Lots of theories out there you could look up, and I want to encourage you to do so as you continue your work in student affairs. And so as I mentioned, in addition to the theories, we want to also focus on assumptions and primary concepts associated to student development. One of the primary ones, and I think they're almost interchangeable, is holistic learning. And so it's been said by some scholars that learning and development are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. And if you really think about that, it makes a lot of sense. This concept of holistic learning focuses on the whole student. And so as I asked you all in the chat to share some of the areas you work on campus, you know, we saw different things, whether it was housing, career services, involvement, health and well-being, or counseling. We see all these different areas that we know as student affairs practitioners contribute to a student's holistic development. They need all of these factors together in addition to what they're learning in the classroom to really develop and to progress in that continuum of development as a human. And so that's why colleges can be a critical component of a student's life experiences. And so this concept of the whole person is really critical. It also helps us justify why we need students to get involved in organizations, or why we want our students to go to campus rec, and how we encourage our faculty to really promote health and well-being in the classroom, not just the textbook. And so again, it legitimizes what we're doing. The second part, and this is a part that I think is so important, is that students are unique persons. And so this framework, student development, acknowledges student diversity. And maybe it was even a little ahead of its time with that. And so we know through the work we do with students that students are multidimensional. They have unique and significant life experiences that they're gaining in college, but also that they're bringing with them to college. And student development requires us to acknowledge those experiences, those cultural backgrounds, those components of the student that makes them unique. And that's so important if we have any intentions to holistically develop them, because a student plays a role in their own education as well. And so the next concept I wanted to highlight really focuses in on the environment. And so as I think about the environment, think of our college campus being the environment we're referring to here. And a student enters campus with those series of experiences, cultural backgrounds, things they're bringing with them. So that's them. But then we impact them, right? The work we do, the interactions they have, the relationships they build, that contributes to their behavior. And so ultimately, the whole campus is a learning lab. I really like that way to view student development. Oftentimes, as I was a new professional, I heard time and time again that student development just really meant that I needed to meet the students where they are. For the longest time, I thought that that solely was associated to their time management skills, that if they needed to meet at 8 o'clock at night, I needed to be available to meet with them at 8 o'clock at night. As I've grown as a scholar of student development and as a professional in my own experiences, I realize there's so many components to that. It's not just meeting students where they are when they're available. It's being aware of the full environment that's contributing to their behavior and development, being aware that they're bringing prior experiences, outside influences that's contributing to their behavior and development, and being a support system for them in those moments. Which leads me to the last concept that I think is really important to share, and that's Stanford's model, which is challenging and supporting. And you might have heard this if you regularly advise students. You might have heard someone say before, we need a challenge and support approach. Challenge and support is so unique because the essence of this is really that students grow or develop by experiencing challenges. We know they're going to experience challenges in college, but if the challenge is too great, they're getting out of there. They're going to retreat. They might even drop out. We're not going to retain them. If that's coupled, though, with just enough support to make the challenge bearable and help them grow and develop from it, it can really lead to some true success in terms of their holistic growth and development. And so in summary, we really have some components here I want you to be able to take away. First is this human growth and stimulation. So student development is focused on the human development continuum. The environment, so in our case, the work we do in student affairs, the college campus influences that. But ultimately, the student owns their own learning, right? They're here. They have to agree, and a lot of times to engage with us. So it takes cooperation. It also takes collaboration from the entire campus. And when you have those three pieces come together, it's going to lead to growth and ultimate holistic development of our students. So I'll turn it back over to Jennifer to talk about what this means for us in student affairs.
Lauren. So like Lauren shared, theory helps us understand what's happening with our students' behavior and the causes behind that behavior on a deep level. It provides a theoretic base for knowledge, expertise, and practice. So how do we use or apply student development theory? With growth and development being one of the central goals of higher education, student development theory allows for student affairs professionals to utilize a common and shared language when collaborating with others to support student success. Student development theory should provide a foundation for your work as a student affairs professional. And each theory can be used to develop a basis for understanding the developmental paths that students might take. And so with this understanding, you can make connections to the broader areas and use that knowledge to plan intentional programs and develop relevant policies. Lauren, would you switch to the next slide? And so through your role in student affairs, you have the opportunity to interact with students through multiple venues, contexts, and environments. Like all of you saw or read earlier, we've got folks from really across their respective divisions that are even present here with us today, representing different functional areas and units that all are supporting our students through those venues and environments. And so we see students through advising appointments, campus events, and activities. Others might interact with students through intake appointments and counseling sessions, or through conduct meetings and healthcare appointments, even in their residence halls. That list could go on and on. But ultimately, it's understanding that we have the opportunity to be a part of their college experience, both in the curricular and in a lot of institutions, and as a part of a lot of our roles as a part of their curricular experience as well. And so ultimately, each of those venues and interactions provides an opportunity to understand and apply the theories that Lauren has described. And so for the purpose of this presentation today, I want to focus on the ways that we can translate this theory to practice through the use of strategies including active learning, student support, and assessment. But please do recognize that there are many other ways. These are just the 3 that we're going to focus on today. We can go to the next slide. And so we're going to talk about Aston a little bit again. He said that for student learning and growth to take place, that students need to actively engage in their environments. And so this means that we as student affairs professionals need to create environments that encourage engagement from our students. And so we can do this through identifying opportunities for students to participate in active learning. And this active learning is going to invite our students to bring those life experiences that we've talked about into the development process and reflect on their own and others' perspectives as they really challenge their own viewpoints, learn about others, and apply new understandings to their own life. A good student affairs practice provides students with opportunities for experimentation through programs focused on engaging students in various learning experiences. And so these opportunities include experiential learning opportunities that provide rich opportunities for reflection. Experiential learning opportunities can be defined using the engagement indicators that have been identified by the National Survey of Student Engagement. Many of you probably know it as the NASPA. These engagement indicators are categorized by 5 themes, and they include academic challenge, learning with peers, experience with faculty, and campus environment. While I'm not going to go over all of the indicators themselves, you can see that they fall within those areas. And so in student affairs, we have the opportunity to explore these themes and facilitate opportunities to provide those quality interactions in a supportive environment. Additionally, many areas in student affairs have the opportunity to facilitate student learning in a peer-to-peer environment. This could resemble a leadership or organization experience, a peer mentorship, or structured group experiences like community service, study abroad, or resident advising. I'd really like to encourage you all to reflect on your experience with students up to this point and utilize the chat to share any other opportunities that you feel like have been left off that allow students to engage in active learning. There's so many to choose from. And so I encourage you in the future to intentionally identify those opportunities for students to take place in active learning through your scope of work at your respective institution. And Lauren, we're ready for the next slide now. And so no matter your role, we all have an opportunity to provide student support, right? To provide those quality interactions in a good and safe environment. And this support can take place in casual settings like appointments, meetings, phone calls, or drop-ins, but can also take form in the way of university policies, departments, and resources that students can utilize while they are students. No matter the nature of the support, it's imperative, and Lauren, you can go back. No matter the nature of the support, I was just checking the chat. It's imperative to provide an appropriate balance of challenge and support, like Lauren had mentioned. The balance is important because we don't want to be, like she said, so hard on students that they give up or stop trying, but we also don't want to hold their hand to the point where they aren't learning anything through that challenge or through their experiences and the interactions, and are therefore unable to develop through those experiences. Sanford said the amount of challenge a person can tolerate depends on the amount of support available. And so I think about an example of this, and love for you all to share any that you can think of as you listen to this, and feel free to utilize the chat for that. But one that comes to mind for me is that several years ago, UAB conducted an institution-wide survey that resulted in an overwhelming response from the university's off-campus students communicating that they did not have the support and resources that they needed in order to be successful. And the university, we really saw that demonstrated through the retention and graduation data that had been collected in the years leading up to this survey. And those students that lived off campus were reporting the support they received did not balance or match the amount of challenge that they were experiencing in navigating through both their academic and personal experiences at the university. So whether that related to parking and transportation for a lot of them, maybe it was off-campus housing needs, maybe it was navigating, parenthood while also being a student, or outside or external priorities that were really relevant to them as a student. But either way, the university didn't have anything in place to really counter those challenges or balance it out. And so as a result, the university dedicated financial and human resources to provide some intentional support for this community so they could be successful. And here at UAB, again, we did that in the form and the development of a department. It doesn't always have to be that way, but sometimes that's going to be what's necessary. And in our instance, it was. Let's see, I see that Donnie said, yeah, balance and challenge and support is so key. And you're absolutely right. And it's a really fine line too, to walk and determine and interpret from our students what is too much and what creates a barrier versus what is truly allowing them to grow. And so we've got to make sure to intentionally build in those checkpoints where we're collecting that feedback from our students. And so whether that's in the form of a formal survey or if it's just through informal conversation, right? Being able to anecdotally share that with our university leaders so that they can make informed decisions. Another example that comes to mind for me is more recent and one that I imagine many of your campuses can relate to. This past spring, as UAB was navigating the COVID-19 pandemic and more specifically moved to fully remote instruction, students were reporting that the volume of work their classes required had significantly increased, and as a result had the potential to negatively impact their grade and their academic success if the student was unable to keep up. And so this provided another instance of an unbalanced challenge and support relationship. In response, the university decided to implement an interim policy that allowed for students to self-select a pass-fail option for their classes and remove some of the pressure they were experiencing as a result of the academic transition to online. Now, as we all know, the pass-fail option on our respective campuses could also provide some barriers in terms of our students' understanding of those policies and what it means in terms of their academic progression. But that's not exactly what this presentation is about, so we're not going to go down that road, but I do want to acknowledge that. And so, Lauren, we can go to the next slide. And so I want to make sure we can talk about this last strategy that I said we were going to mention. And, this final strategy provides an opportunity to apply student development theory in the area of assessment. This one may not be the first that comes to mind for a lot of us, but it really should be, because if we want to be able to assess the impact that students' experiences are having on their learning and development, then we need a grounded approach in theory. And student development theory is that grounded approach. The most common example of this that I could think of, or one that I find myself reaching for the most frequently, comes from utilizing Bloom's framework for categorizing educational goals. So the taxonomy of educational objectives, or what we typically just call it is Bloom's taxonomy. And in this instance, we're able to use this theory to understand the levels at which students learn and apply knowledge, which allows us to set realistic goals for future learning and application. As you all have, or as we've shared with some of the examples, and as I hope to hear a little bit more from you all with examples from your own institutions, there's really no limit to where and how development theory can be applied to our practice within student affairs. I think it's more about us creating the intentional spaces to ensure that we are grounding our work and grounding our decision-making in theory and considering it as we're making decisions and as we're supporting our students. It by no means should be the only consideration as a part of the work that we're doing within student affairs, but definitely needs to be something that's a part of that equation. And Lauren touched on this earlier, but I do just want to reinforce that We need to carefully avoid using theories to label or diagnose individual students. What theory does not account for is our students' individual experiences, like she said. And so those are what we can only gain through our interactions with students and those relationships that we've developed through our roles on our respective campuses. But our knowledge of theory is really what allows us to be intentional through those interactions. And so I am going to turn it back over to Lauren to wrap us up and see if we've got any questions.
And so again, thank you all for really participating today and sharing your thoughts. I see some of you have shared those in the chat. We did want to reserve some time at the end to allow you to share your audio and video if you would like to share perspective from your experiences as it relates to student development, or even maybe what you've taken away from a course that Jennifer and I might not have touched on today. And so if you would like to share, feel free to use that button at the top to request to share your audio and video, or you're welcome to use the chart. It looks like, or not chart, chat. It looks like Donnie shared something in the chat here. He said, shout out to my direct supervisor in explaining blooms when we're working on our area assessment. I absolutely agree. You know, when I'm trying to come up with learning outcomes, for example, blooms, that visual is typically the first thing I'm bringing up to really help me visualize, because I'm a visual learner, kind of the area in which I should target my students' development. Let's see, Maya, it looked like you were trying to join. Here she is. Hey, Maya.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
We can.
Cool. Yeah, I think going back to what both of y'all said about like not using like the student development to label a student is very important. I saw somebody say that they were in a college student class right now, and I'm in college student development in my master's program. And we just had to write a paper about our personal development through undergrad. And it made me realize a lot. I was looking through my transcript and I saw how terrible my grades were. But then as I was telling my story, being involved is what kept me in school, is what helped me graduate, because I had that outlet to kind of carry me through everything. And if you looked at my transcript, you would have been like, what is she doing in college still? But it was so helpful to be able to be in student involvement and have those experiences that ended up changing my career path. And that's all.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. You know, we've got to give a shout out to Maya. She's one of our professional staff members in the student involvement office, and she was a student leader here at UAB. She was the executive director for our Student Leadership and Service Council, so she had a really high level of involvement. And I can say from an outside perspective, as not her direct advisor, but certainly someone who witnessed her growth, that she did an exceptional job as a student. We've seen that carry over and continue in her role as a professional. Anybody else want to share your perspective or an experience you've had working with students or through your own lens? Feel free to use that blue button to join your audio or video. All right. Well, know that we hope that this conversation continues for you. Recall that you can use the networking feature throughout today or tomorrow's conference to connect with other colleagues. It's kind of like speed dating and pretty fun. And so I want to encourage you to do that and to continue conversations like this so that we can best support our students. It looks like Abby has requested to join, so we're going to invite her in. Let's see, Abby, are you there? I'm not sure. She might join here shortly. Do know that if you want to continue this conversation with Jennifer or myself, we would welcome that opportunity. We also welcome collaboration and any ideas you have for ways our institutions might work together to better serve both of our students. And so our email addresses are found there. And then shameless plug, we'd love for you to follow our Instagram account, Get Involved UAB. That's often where we're sharing a lot of the developmental experiences we're creating for our students. And I know it certainly helps us to follow accounts from other institutions and see what they're doing, because oftentimes we can learn from each other. And so thank you all for attending this afternoon. We hope that you have a fantastic time both today and tomorrow at the conference. And we certainly want you to stay involved with NASPA Alabama. So as Chris said this morning, or I guess it was this afternoon, there are opportunities right now to get involved on our board. If you have an interest in that, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Jennifer, Chris, Joanne, any of the NASPA Alabama people you meet today and tomorrow. We would welcome an opportunity to talk to you more about that experiences and ways we